And it's actually a great segue into the next question I want to get to, which goes to the reserve currency status on things. Like I said in the beginning, I'm not obviously understanding like history to the different emperors and all the dates and all stuff like you do. But one of the things that I do study a lot and that I really have an interest in is the economic side of it, right? And you probably know this, you probably read it, but the famous investor, arguably probably the greatest hedge fund manager ever, is Ray Dalio. And he wrote a book called The Changing World Order. Now, when I say that, I don't mean like world order, like, the emperor or anything like that.
But in order of eating the dogs.
Exactly. But in it, like he talks about the cycles of empires, and he talks a little bit about Rome, but he really goes back to the last few that we've had, which is the Dutch Empire to the British, and then the US and China today. And the key to every dominant world power is having the reserve currency throughout the world. But this dominance really changes in cycles about every 200, 250 years or so is what he shows. And one thing that I've learned from studying world history and the markets is that things a lot of times can go on much longer than you'd expect them to. Like Rome probably lasted a lot longer than people, think it should have, right? But it still did. And whether it's a world power, like a bull market cycle or anything like that. But eventually they end. And for a dominant power, that end is marked by them losing their reserve currency status. And so like right now, like the US dollar is still the king. But you can see over the last 20 or so years, the US dollar as a percentage of transactions around the world is going down. Like it peaked and it's going down to where it's in the 50% or so range now. So it's got a long way to go before it's, really something to write home about, if you will. But we also have groups like the Brics and stuff that are working to, stop going around the dollar. And the reason for everybody, so you know this, Jeremy, and it's a little long-winded, but we'll get to the question here in a second. The reason this all happened, right, is in 1944, after World War II, Europe is leveled. Japan gone, right? Like if you saw Europe, it literally was just leveled to the ground. There were like every building, right? For the most part. And Britain too. Britain had been bombed over and over and over again. And so who's left and who is the king is the United States. Right. And we went on the Marshall Plan, all that stuff, and we built up the whole world again. And so what we did at that point is you had all these different nations that were in rubbles that had their own currencies, and it was a mess. And so what happened at Bretton Woods in 44 is they came together and said, okay, we're going to use the US dollar. We're going to peg that to $35 per 1 ounce of gold. And we're going to use that as our currency now around the world because it's stable. The United States is, a powerhouse, production, spoils of war, all that stuff. And that worked really well up until about 1971, when, to continue funding the Vietnam War, Nixon suspended the convertibility of the dollar to gold. And then currency started to float, and it caused some problems. So Kissinger went over to Saudi Arabia a couple of years later and said, hey, guys, how about you, price oil, because that's the lifeblood of what makes the world go, in dollars. And for doing so, we'll protect you. So that was the agreement that was made. So we changed basically one commodity for another, right? And so the big issue right now is that Saudi Arabia has joined the BRICS. The BRICS are Brazil, Russia, China, India, really the economies that have all the commodities now, right? They're the ones that have the mines and a lot of the oil and that type of stuff. And so the BRICS are, and they came out and stated it, that they are working to find their own way of transacting. And they're already doing that. They're transacting in rupees and, yuan and other things around the dollar and starting to go outside the system. And ultimately, they're working on a currency that supposedly is gold backed, right? So that process could eventually unseat the dollar, or we could have one of those times where you have multiple world currencies and world powers that, there's no dominant superpower. The question I have is, for us to learn from history, how did that unfold in Rome, right? When it came to their currency losing its reserve status, and how do you see that comparable with the dollar today?
Well, and first of all, I'll never understand as much about world markets and stuff as you do. You're definitely have a bigger understanding of global markets and stuff like that than I do. But the thing I'll say, like, I think that it's a little bit different. Just because of like sophistication of it is different, if that makes sense. Because what happens is you have, under the Roman Republic, for most of the Republic, people are just trading things in weights and measures. Like they're weighing their gold and silver. Coins really only come in the later Republic when they need a way to actually pay the military. So that coins actually start because they need a exchange that's needed to pay the military. And then it becomes widely used by others, but it actually starts to need to pay the military in the late Republic, around the time of Gaius Marius. So you're looking around the year 100 BC. Now, what starts to happen, as we mentioned, soldiers start losing faith in this currency because they're the ones getting paid, right, to serve behind these emperors. So what happens in the mid 3rd century is you have the Roman Empire actually gets these 2 breakaway provinces. In the west, you have what's called the Gallic Empire, which is just a Roman general that decides, all right, I know you're not strong enough to stop me, so this legion and we're going to go form an empire. And they last for a good 20 years. Like they're actually off of Rome for another 20 years. In the east, you have another breakaway empire called the Palmyran Empire. So now you just have the central part of Rome that's an empire. You have a break-off empire in the west and a break-off empire in the east, because this is what happens when people have less of a belief in currency, right? If there is no currency, there's nothing to hold things together. And then so you have in the 270s, Emperor Aurelian will actually reunite the empire and bring these two pieces of the empire back in. But he's assassinated by his troops. So once again, that can tell you something about how much people actually believe in currency. So I think what you see here is currency leads to destabilization, but it also leads to competitors and enemies and other groups not having faith in you, if that makes sense. And they think they can kind of push you around a bit.
Well, and the reason that's happened is the U.S., I think and it's tough, but I think we made a fatal flaw. If you have a reserve currency, you have a responsibility. And one of the biggest fatal flaws that we made over the last few years, we started weaponizing the U.S. dollar. For example, Russia's bad, right? In this grand scheme of things with Ukraine and stuff, right? That's the prevailing thing. So what did we do? All these countries, to be able to buy oil and everything around the world, have to own U.S. debt. That's why the U.S. bond market is the largest, most liquid bond market in the world. So they own U.S. debt. They buy U.S. debt. So they basically exchange their currency for dollars so that they can buy oil and fund their economies and stuff like that. Overnight, we froze and just took all of Russia's bonds. You're bad. We took all your bonds. Now, I'm not going to get into whether that is right or wrong or what do you believe. It doesn't matter. But what that did to a lot of these other countries around the world is signal to them, oh, crap, if we do something the U.S. doesn't like, they can take our money and freeze our bonds overnight and we're out of luck, which is why the Brics got together and are doing a lot of things that they're doing, right? So I think that's a challenge when you start weaponizing that currency, as well too. And that seems like some things that they started to do a little bit differently. I mean, like shaving coins and things that they started to do and clipping and that type of stuff is a way of kind of weaponizing your currency, in those times of Rome. And so to me, there are similar parallels of this.